When a teacher arranges desks into rows, steps behind a podium, or sparks a discussion, it feels like a conscious choice, but it's often autopilot. Sociologist Dan Lordy identified the root of this automaticity. He called it the apprenticeship of observation. This chart compares formal training hours across professions. A surgeon or a lawyer undergoes rigorous technical training before they are allowed to observe the inner workings of their field. Teachers do the exact opposite. They spend upwards of 13,000 hours watching instruction as students before taking a single formal education course. During that massive span of childhood and adolescence, future educators absorb deeply ingrained ideas about how authority works, what a valid test looks like, and how classroom discourse is supposed to flow. This flowchart maps how observation turns into instruction. It starts with those 13,000 hours, which calcify into internalized pedagogical scripts. Once a teacher faces the reality of the classroom, these scripts bypass conscious planning. They become unexamined classroom habits, resulting directly in automatic, non-reflective teaching. Most daily instruction isn't driven by educational theory. It's a generational echo masking as professional instinct. Managing 30 distinct learners while navigating a strict curriculum and administrative demands creates intense real-time cognitive overload. Under that series and fall back on the path of least resistance. This leads to pedagogical dissonance, a sharp gap between what an educator explicitly believes about how learning happens and how they actually behave under pressure. If we look at this learning paradigm matrix, we see a spectrum of epistemologies. On one end is constructivism, where students actively build their own understanding, contrasted sharply with traditional behaviorism. An educator might claim to be a constructivist, yet their stressed classroom reverts to repetitive drills, instant error correction, and token rewards, methods straight from B.F. Skinner's behavioral conditioning experiments. Add to this syllabus velocity, the intense institutional pressure to cover a massive amount of content by the end of the semester. This forces teachers to drop student-led inquiry entirely and rush back to high-speed lecturing. Defaulting to traditional instruction isn't a lack of talent, nor is it hypocrisy. It is a structural survival mechanism. Overcoming it requires deliberate, systemic tools. To break out of this automaticity, educators must audit the physical mechanics of their teaching. The most immediate diagnostic is classroom discourse. Who is actually speaking? This graphic illustrates teacher talk time versus student talk time. Traditional classrooms heavily skew towards an 80-20 split, while inquiry-driven models aim for a 40-60 balance. High teacher talk time feels productive, but listening is passive. True retention requires the student to verbally articulate concepts. Then there is wait time 1, the pause after a teacher asks a question. On average, instructors wait less than 1.5 seconds before calling on someone or answering it themselves. Deliberately extending that pause to 3 to 5 seconds produces empirical results. Participation rises, answers become syntactically complex, and introverted learners volunteer far more frequently. The IRE trap inflates teacher speech: initiation, response, evaluation. When a teacher simply says correct, that evaluation terminates cognitive processing for the room. Reflective practice rewrites this into an IRF chain: initiation, response, follow-up. A follow-up branches dialogue outward to peers. Mastering classroom silence and rewriting dialogue structures shifts the cognitive heavy lifting off the teacher and onto the learner. The second mechanical diagnostic is how an educator responds when a student makes a mistake. An educator's response to errors reveals their underlying epistemology, the specific, internalized belief about how knowledge is actually built. This matrix plots error correction strategies. Explicit, immediate correction achieves high precision, but raises the student's anxiety level, shutting down fluency. Conversely, delayed systemic feedback notes whole class patterns without interrupting, addressing errors anonymously later to protect student ego. Educators must monitor their own personal tolerance for letting mistakes pass uncorrected in real time. An uncontrollable urge to correct every minor error proves that the teacher prioritizes immediate performance perfection over long-term developmental growth. The final and most consequential audit happens before the class even begins, examining assessment design. John Biggs designed constructive alignment, linking intended learning outcomes, teaching activities, and assessment tasks. Deep learning occurs only when synchronized. When assessment tasks disconnect, you get testing washback. The exam's format dictates the learning, overriding intended goals. Consider a specific scenario. A syllabus states the intended outcome is the critical analysis of historical sources, but the actual classroom activity is just a slide presentation about those sources, and the summative assessment is a 50-question multiple-choice exam asking for factual dates. Later in the curriculum, when those students fail to analyze complex texts, the unreflective teacher blames the student's capability. Assessments are mirrors. If the test measures rote recall, then rote recall, not critical analysis, is what was actually taught and valued. Reflection cannot be unstructured brooding on the drive home from work. It must be treated as a strict discipline of professional inquiry. This is Gibbs' reflective cycle. It provides a 6-stage empirical protocol for post-lesson analysis: description, feelings, evaluation, analysis, conclusion, and action plan. Take a common failure, a 30-minute peer review essay task that immediately devolves into chaotic, off-topic chatter. The cycle validates the feeling of frustration, but forces a pivot into objective analysis, perhaps recognizing that giving abstract instructions without a visual rubric overloaded the student's working memory. It resolves strictly at the action plan stage, deciding to redesign the next class using explicit rubrics and a gradual release model. To fully diagnose these blind spots, educators need peer observation, but this observation must be entirely divorced from administrative performance evaluations. Observers distinguish between high inference and low inference data. Instead of recording judgmental, high inference notes like the lesson was boring, they document objective facts, for example, that a teacher spoke for 6 minutes without visual aids. Authentic reflection requires stripping away ego to view our teaching behaviors strictly as observable data. There is a massive barrier to this work: vulnerability. Teaching is an ego-involved profession, and admitting a lesson failed triggers imposter syndrome. Add to that reflective fatigue. Exhausted educators simply lack the time for elaborate administrative journaling. The solution is a lightweight, sustainable alternative: the 3-minute post-class audit. Right after a lesson, use the one keep, one change heuristic. Note one thing that worked and one concrete adjustment to make, capturing the empirical data before working memory fades. This rigorous self-examination stems from philosopher John Dewey, who drew a hard line between routine action guided by impulse and reflective action guided by evidence. It leads to a specific mindset for pedagogical mastery. My methods are hypotheses, my lessons are experiments, and my students' engagement is the empirical data by which I judge my craft. Cultivating self-awareness is an active rebellion against pedagogical inertia. By understanding exactly why we teach the way we do, we finally earn the autonomy to teach the way we should.